Underneath Las Vegas, there is approximately 200 miles of tunnel network. These tunnels have become a secret world for the so-called mole people.
Across the United States, some of the strangest places aren't on the map at all. They're under it.
A large working city operating deep underground as we go about our lives on the surface above. It's real, and it's right here in the United States.
Drones recently slipped into areas the public never sees and uncovered proof of entire hidden worlds beneath everyday streets and quiet hillsides.
But what if I told you that beneath your feet, sometimes thousands of feet below, exist entire cities, underground complexes that could house thousands of people?
From a forgotten city buried by mud and fire, to a secret mountain base built to survive the end of the world.
Hidden in this mountain is a $1 billion nuclear bunker.
We're 2,000 feet underground inside of a mountain.
And it can survive the biggest atomic bombs ever made.
To a massive cavern turned into a working metropolis. These are America's hidden underground cities.
Could you describe a Raven Rock to me, like what it is, what it's for?
No. It's the most unbelievable place you can imagine. You're 768 feet below the surface.
The buried streets of old Seattle. If you walk through Seattle's Pioneer Square and look down, you see rows of small glass squares set into the sidewalks. Some are cloudy, some are pale purple. Most people step over them without a second thought, but they are skylights. They were built so sunlight could reach an older level of the city that now sits buried under the streets, with old sidewalks, doorways, and storefronts sealed in the dark. Seattle ended up with part of its downtown underground because the first version of the city was built in a bad spot. In the mid-1800s, the town grew on soft tide flats and steep hills beside Elliott Bay. Streets were dirt or loose wooden planks. After rain, wagons and people sank into thick mud. At high tide, bay water sometimes flooded the lowest blocks. Early sewers were just simple wooden pipes that carried waste downhill toward the water. When the tide came in, seawater pushed back into those pipes and could send foul water right back toward town. People knew the ground was wrong and the drains were wrong, but the city kept growing anyway. The disaster that forced a change came on June 6, 1889. That afternoon, in a cabinet shop on what was then called Front Street, a worker tipped over a pot of hot glue that was heating on a stove. The glue caught fire. Flames ran through wood shavings on the floor, then jumped into neighboring buildings and under the wooden sidewalks, which worked like dry fuse lines. Fire crews rushed in, but the water system could not keep up. Hydrants were far apart, the pipes were small, and as more hoses opened, water pressure dropped. The fire rolled through block after block, helped by dry lumber and a strong breeze from the bay. By early the next morning, the center of Seattle was gone. The Great Seattle Fire had burned roughly 25 city blocks and more than 100 acres of the business district and waterfront. It wiped out shops, hotels, offices, several wharves, and the rail terminals. Losses were later put at close to $20 million in 1889 money. Yet only one human death is clearly recorded in the fire itself. Reports from the time say the blaze killed far more animals, including an estimated 1 million rats, and left thousands of people out of work. The young city had lost its heart, but not its people, and it now had to decide what kind of place it wanted to be when it came back. City leaders quickly agreed they would not just rebuild the way things had been. The council banned new wooden buildings in the core of downtown. New structures had to be made of brick or stone to slow any future fire. At the same time, there was a strong push to raise the street level by 1 or 2 stories. If they could lift the streets above the worst mud and above peak high tides, sewers could finally drain the right way, and floods would be less common. Along each ruined street, crews poured tall concrete walls where the new curbs would be, leaving a deep trench down the middle. Workers then cut into nearby hills and washed dirt and sand down through large pipes into that trench. Over time, the fill built up between the walls until it reached the new planned height. In much of Pioneer Square, this new street level ended up around 12 feet higher than before. In some spots, it was close to 30 feet higher. Storefronts and sidewalks that had once been at ground level now sat at the bottom of tall concrete canyons, looking up at a street that had moved to where second-floor windows used to be. For several years, Seattle lived with 2 levels at once. Many brick buildings had survived the fire and still opened onto their original sidewalks below, even as the roads beside them rose higher and higher. Temporary wooden walkways were built along the tops of the new walls so wagons and pedestrians could move at the raised height. To reach the shops, customers climbed long ladders down from the new sidewalks to the old ones. On a single block, you could stand on the new street and look down into a slot where people were still walking along the old one. The lower levels still needed light. Builders left a narrow gap between the raised street and the fronts of the buildings, and covered that gap with iron frames filled with small, thick glass blocks, called vault lights. From above, they looked like rows of glass tiles in the pavement. From below, they worked like bands of skylights, letting daylight pour into the covered sidewalk. When they were new, the glass was mostly clear. Many blocks turned purple over time because they contained manganese, a chemical that changes color after long exposure to sunlight. That is why the sidewalks in Pioneer Square still sparkle with pale purple glass today, even though most people no longer know what lies under them. In 1907, city officials decided this hidden level was too risky. They worried about disease, including bubonic plague, which had appeared in West Coast ports in the early 1900s. Dark, crowded passageways under the streets seemed like a bad place for large groups of people. The city condemned most of the underground sidewalks. From that point on, they were no longer official public paths. Some stretches were sealed, others stayed open but were mostly ignored, left to dust, leaks, and decay. Over the next decades, many of the buried rooms and corridors took on rough new uses. Some were packed with boxes and supplies for nearby stores. Some turned into cheap, illegal sleeping spots for people with nowhere else to stay. Local stories talk about hidden gambling rooms, secret bars during Prohibition, and opium dens tucked away in the dark. By the 1960s, even the visible part of Pioneer Square was in bad shape. Many of the old brick buildings from the 1890s were empty or crumbling. Some planners argued that the neighborhood should be torn down and replaced with parking lots and modern office blocks. The buried sidewalks and storefronts below were damp and almost forgotten. It took one curious newspaper writer to bring them back into public view. That writer was Bill Speidel, a Seattle columnist and local history fan. In 1964, he received a letter from a reader asking whether the stories about tunnels and sunken streets under Pioneer Square were true. He printed the question and promised to find out. He dug into old city files and started exploring basements and sealed doors under the neighborhood. What he found was clear proof that a second layer of old streets and storefronts still sat under the modern sidewalks. When he was ready, he used his column to invite the reader to meet him in Pioneer Square on a Saturday so he could show her what he had discovered. He expected a small group. Instead, when he and his wife arrived, the square was packed. Roughly 500 people had seen the notice and were standing there with dollar bills, all wanting a tour. Speidel quickly gathered the money, split the crowd into smaller groups, and led them down stairways and through locked doors into the buried sidewalks. That day turned into the first public underground tour of Pioneer Square. The demand was so strong that he turned the idea into a full business. If Seattle's buried streets show the past, what's inside the next mountain shows how far the country went to prepare for the future. The Doomsday City inside a mountain. On the edge of Colorado Springs, there is a mountain that looks like any other from the outside. Trees on the slopes, rock near the top, houses and a zoo down below. But if you follow a road that curves around the hillside, you end up at something that does not look natural at all. A man-made tunnel cut straight into the rock. A car or bus can drive right into that tunnel. The walls are bare granite. There are lights fixed to the ceiling. The road goes in deeper and deeper until the daylight behind you shrinks to a small dot. At the far end of the tunnel, the rock suddenly opens into a wide hall, and there you see them. Two huge steel doors, one behind the other, each so heavy it weighs many tons. These are blast doors. When they swing shut, they seal the inside off from the outside world. Behind them is one of the hardest places to reach on Earth, a small underground city built to keep running even if nuclear bombs go off in the sky. The reason anyone put a city inside this mountain goes back to the Cold War. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, the United States and the Soviet Union were racing to build long-range bombers and missiles. Leaders in the United States and Canada worried about what would happen if major cities or normal military bases were hit with nuclear weapons. Radar stations could give some warning if enemy bombers or missiles were coming. But those radars and command centers needed a safe place to send their signals, and people needed a safe place to read them and make decisions. A simple building on the surface did not feel safe enough anymore. So the United States military decided to put a command center inside Cheyenne Mountain, just outside Colorado Springs. Work started on June 19, 1961. Army engineers used drills and explosives to hollow out caverns inside the granite. They removed about 693,000 tons of rock to make room. By 1966, the main operations center for NORAD, the joint United States-Canadian command that watches the skies and space over North America, was up and running. The full construction cost at the time was about $142 million, which would be much more in today's money. The complex sits under about 2,000 feet of solid rock. That granite acts like a huge shield. Inside that shield is an open space of about 5 acres. In that space sit 15 three-story buildings made of steel and concrete. They are real buildings with walls, floors, and roofs, but they do not touch the mountain. Instead, each sits on big steel springs, more than 1,000 of them in total. Those springs are designed so the buildings can move just a little, less than 1 inch, if a shockwave or earthquake hits the mountain. The cables and pipes that connect everything are flexible, so they do not snap if the buildings shift. At the main entrance, those huge blast doors guard the tunnel. Each door is about 3 feet thick and weighs around 25 tons. They are shaped and mounted in a way that lets them flex under pressure without breaking. The whole complex was designed to handle the shock from a very powerful nuclear explosion, measured in tens of millions of tons of TNT, going off a little more than 1 mile away. The rock takes most of the hit. The tunnel and the doors bend but stay closed, and the springs under the buildings help keep equipment and people inside alive. There is another threat besides blast and heat, a high-altitude electromagnetic pulse, often shortened to HEMP. That is what happens when a nuclear weapon explodes high in the atmosphere and sends out a strong wave of energy. That wave can fry electronics over a wide area, even if no blast hits the ground. Cheyenne Mountain is the only underground United States Defense Department site that is officially certified to survive that kind of pulse. Its cables, rooms, and power systems are shielded and filtered so that, even if normal power and electronics outside are wiped out, the systems inside the mountain can still run. The air that people breathe in there is also protected. Fresh air normally comes in through shafts and vents. Along those paths are special blast valves with heavy plates and filters. In a crisis, those valves can slam shut to protect against shock waves. When they are open, the filters can strip out dangerous dust or particles, including chemical, biological, or radioactive material, so people inside can keep breathing, even if the air outside is dirty or toxic. All of that protection only matters if the place can support life on its own. Cheyenne Mountain has its own power plant with big diesel generators. It has large stores of fuel and huge battery banks ready to take over if outside power from Colorado Springs goes down. Water comes from springs inside the mountain and is stored in excavated reservoirs. One system holds about 1.5 million gallons of water for drinking and firefighting. Another set holds about 4.5 million gallons of water that is used as a heat sink, meaning a giant cooling pool for the generators and other systems. Workers have said those underground water rooms are big enough that people sometimes cross them in small boats. Inside the mountain, there are medical rooms, a small store or market, a cafeteria, fitness spaces, and a chapel. There are rows of metal bunks, plus small rooms set aside for senior officers who might need to live and work there during a crisis. There are also offices, meeting rooms, and long hallways lined with cables. For a long time, most of this was hidden from the public. But Cheyenne Mountain slowly turned into a pop culture icon. Movies like War Games in the 1980s used it as the setting for a nuclear war control room. TV shows like Stargate SG-1 pretended there was a secret portal to other planets buried deep inside. More recently, the complex has shown up in films like Interstellar as a base for space agencies starting over after a disaster. In 2025, a Mr. Beast video brought fresh attention when he toured Cheyenne Mountain as the final and most expensive bunker in a lineup that went from cheap to extreme. He showed the tunnel, the blast doors, and some of the inner spaces, giving millions of viewers a quick look at a place most will never enter. Even in that short clip, you could see how thick the doors are, how deep the tunnels go, and how much gear is still set up to be used if needed. From a bunker built for nuclear war, we're heading to a completely different world underground. A massive industrial city carved from rock. Subtropolis, the underground industrial metropolis. Imagine you are driving a truck on a normal road on the north side of Kansas City, Missouri. You pass rail tracks, warehouses, and open lots. Then you see a huge, square opening cut into a rocky hill. There is a road going straight into the hill, and big signs over the entrance say Subtropolis. Instead of pulling up to a loading dock outside, the truck keeps going and disappears into the rock. Inside that hill is a full business park under the ground, with miles of roads, hundreds of truck docks, and thousands of people working every weekday. Subtropolis sits in the bluffs above the Missouri River, in a man-made cave carved from a strong type of rock called Bethany Falls limestone. Limestone is stone made from old seabeds that hardened over millions of years. In this area, the layer is thick and tough, so it was good for mining. Over time, miners removed stone and left behind a huge empty space. That empty mine now covers about 55 million square feet. Parts of it lie as deep as 160 feet below the surface. Subtropolis, the business park inside this mine, today uses roughly 10 million square feet, with more rooms still waiting to be finished as new companies move in. The mining method that created this space is called room and pillar. Workers dug out long halls, or rooms, in the limestone, but they did not clear everything. They left thick square columns of rock in place as pillars to hold up the roof. In Subtropolis, the main halls are about 16 feet high and 40 feet wide. The rock pillars that hold up the ceiling are about 25 feet by 25 feet. The strength of the limestone is very high, far stronger than normal concrete, so the pillars can support the weight of everything above. That is why it was safe to turn this old mine into a permanent workplace instead of sealing it off. The man who saw a new use for the empty mine was Lamar Hunt, founder of the Kansas City Chiefs football team. In the 1960s, Hunt bought the old limestone operation through his company, Hunt Midwest. He looked at the steady temperatures and wide tunnels and realized you could store goods here instead of building more warehouses on the surface. Ford Motor Company used the underground space to park extra vehicles out of the weather. Pillsbury stored food products. Russell Stover used it for candy. From there, Subtropolis grew into what its owners now call the world's largest underground business complex. Inside the mine, there is a grid of paved, lit roads roughly 8 to 10 miles in total, wide enough for semi-trucks and forklifts to pass each other. Along those roads sit more than 500 truck dock doors carved into the rock walls where trailers can back in and load or unload. Rail lines reach inside as well, with a couple of miles of track that let freight trains pull into the cavern to drop off or pick up goods. The whole place is marked with street names and address numbers so drivers and workers do not get lost. Fire sprinklers, lights, and air systems are built into the ceilings. When you are down there, it looks less like a natural cave and more like an industrial town built indoors. One of the biggest selling points of Subtropolis is its constant temperature. Because it is wrapped in solid rock, the air stays around the mid to upper 60s in degrees Fahrenheit all year long, even when Kansas City gets winter snow or summer heat waves. The humidity is fairly steady too. That means tenants do not have to spend as much money heating and cooling their space as they would in a normal warehouse on the surface. Hunt Midwest says companies can save 50 to 70% on energy costs by using this underground space instead of a surface building of the same size. Those conditions are useful for many types of work. Food companies like having a cool, steady climate for ingredients and finished products. Medical suppliers and drug makers like the tight control over temperature. The United States Postal Service runs a center in Subtropolis that handles its collectible stamp program, storing sheets of stamps and related materials that need to stay in good shape. The Environmental Protection Agency has a unit here that uses the underground space for training and storage. The National Archives and Records Administration uses climate-controlled rooms in Subtropolis to store federal records and films that would be at risk if they sat in hotter, more humid buildings on the surface. Data center operators have also moved in, setting up rows of computer servers in special rooms and using the natural cool air to cut the cost of keeping machines from overheating. There are also some unusual tenants that show how flexible this underground world can be. One long-running business is an underground paintball arena where visitors play games among the rock pillars. Another is a plant nursery called Bird's Botanicals that grows orchids and other delicate plants in the steady, protected air. That was a city built for trucks and warehouses. The next one is built for office workers trying to escape the weather. Houston's Hidden Workday City. On a hot summer afternoon in downtown Houston, the streets look pretty normal. You see glass towers, cars stuck at lights, and people hurrying across crosswalks. Then an office worker pushes through a glass door into a lobby, crosses a tiled floor, and steps onto an escalator going down. At the bottom, the city changes. There are bright halls with no windows, long lines of lunch spots, coffee stands, and small shops. You can't hear traffic. You can't see the sky. But you are still in downtown Houston, just about 20 feet under the street. This hidden world is the Houston Tunnel System. It is a set of air-conditioned walkways under the center of the city. The main part of the tunnels links around 95 full city blocks and runs for roughly 6 miles. The whole thing started in a very small way. In the 1930s, downtown Houston had two movie theaters that sat close to each other. One of the first tunnels was simply a short passage built between those theaters so guests could move from one to the other without going out into the weather. It was a small comfort feature, nothing more. But it planted an idea. If you can link two basements, you can link more. Growth picked up in the early 1960s. In 1961, a bank building known as the Bank of the Southwest was connected by an underground passage to a nearby parking garage and another office building. From there, more building owners began to dig their own tunnels to connect their towers, garages, and nearby properties. None of this came from one big city plan. Each piece was built for private reasons, to give office workers a dry path from the garage or to tie two towers together. Over time, those separate passages bumped into each other and were joined, until the system tied together almost all of downtown's main office core. If you walk through the tunnels, you notice that they feel different from block to block. Most of the walkways run through the lower floors of office towers, then pass under the street to the next building. As you cross from one property to another, the floor tiles change. The ceiling lights look different. The paint, the signs, even the shape of the corridors can switch suddenly. Each owner built and decorated their own stretch, so the look of the tunnels tells you who you are walking under, even if you never see a street sign. Getting down into this underground world is not as simple as walking down some public steps on every corner. In most places, you have to enter a private building first. You walk into a lobby at street level, then take an elevator, an escalator, or a stairway down to the tunnel floor. Only two places let you walk in directly from the street into the tunnels themselves: Wells Fargo Plaza, one of the big office towers on Louisiana Street, and the McKinney Garage on Main, a large parking facility. The tunnels run on office time. Most sources agree that they are open on weekdays only, from early morning to early evening. Typical hours are around 6 in the morning to 6 or 6:30 in the evening. After that, many doors to the tunnels are locked, food courts pull their shutters down, and the underground city goes quiet. In the middle of a workday, though, this place feels busy. Around lunchtime, you can walk past long lines at sandwich shops, bakeries, salad bars, burger places, and local spots that only people who work downtown really know. There are coffee stands on corners of the tunnels, smoothie bars, and dessert counters. Food is only part of it. As you move along, you pass bank branches, ATM clusters, copy and shipping centers, small clinics, opticians, and dentists. There are dry cleaners as well. Some tunnels have barbershops and beauty salons set up for quick cuts on a lunch break. Because the passages weave under so many buildings, the layout can be confusing if you are new. The city and local groups publish color-coded maps that show which tunnels belong to which buildings, and where you can climb back to street level. Overhead signs at key junctions point toward tower names, garage levels, and food courts. Houston needed this second layer for a simple reason: the weather. The city is hot and humid for much of the year. In summer, afternoon temperatures often sit in the 90s, and the air can feel heavy even in the shade. Sudden heavy showers and thunderstorms are common. Walking 5 or 6 blocks outside in a suit or carrying a laptop bag through the rain is not fun. The tunnels offer a way around that. Being underground comes with its own problems. The biggest scare came from water. In June 2001, Tropical Storm Allison stalled over Houston and dropped record rain on the city. Some spots around the region saw more than 40 inches of rain over several days. Downtown streets turned into rivers. The storm flooded freeways, parking garages, and many basements. Reports from that time say that the downtown tunnel system itself was submerged. After Allison, building owners and engineers had to think harder about how water moves through this hidden network. Downward ramps, stairwells, and doors that opened at low spots became weak points where water could pour into the tunnels. In response, owners added new defenses at some entrances and connections. These include raised curbs, sloped ramps that steer water away, and metal barriers and floodgates that can be closed when heavy rain is on the way. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.